Content warning, there are just no words that are appropriate other than a long string of profanities. Okay, so I missed releasing something last week. Well, actually, I started recording something about how a centrist prime minister was caving into the ultra-right-wing factions of his party, but my voice wasn't really having it. And after about 2 hours, I decided to give up, at which point I looked at the news and we were having a leadership spill, which meant he probably wasn't going to be a prime minister by the end of the day anyway. And well, he was, but it was the end of the day, and without going into too much detail of my schedule, if I don't record it on Monday, I have to wait until a Friday, at which point he was no longer the prime minister. We also had some other things as well, Manafort and Cohen, and there were a few other things I wanted to talk about. But then on Thursday, an elephant walked in the room. You see, in the week prior, a 1,400-page report into child sex abuse in the Catholic Church had been released by the Pennsylvania grand jury. Now, I hadn't had a chance to have a look at it myself, but I listened to a show called The Scathing Atheist. At the beginning of The Scathing Atheist, there is a section called Diatribe. It is essentially kind of like this, what I'm doing here. In fact, so much so that I messaged Noah when I wanted to start this podcast and said, this is what I want to do. It's going to sound a lot like Diatribes. Is that okay with you? And he said, well, I don't own a trademark on angry people with the microphone. I went, well, one more angry person can't hurt. So Noah had read the report and he'd done a diatribe on it, and I thought he did a pretty good job of it, and I felt, well, I really have nothing to add because I haven't read it. So I've been trying. I've been trying so desperately to think of something else to talk about, but I can't. And the reason why I can't is because it's not because something has changed since Thursday. In fact, it's the complete opposite. It's because nothing has changed since Thursday. It's because despite the reports being released, despite the reports in the media, no one outside the skeptical community seems to give a shit. I mean, it can be very easily in our little bubble where we're surrounded by people on Facebook and we listen to our podcast and we go, well, it's being talked about. Everyone's talking about it. I can't turn on a podcast these days without somebody talking about it. Well, try and look outside the bubble and nobody is talking about it. Nothing has changed. And that's why I feel compelled to talk about it today, because between Thursday and now, nothing has changed. We had a letter released by the Pope saying, I'm really, really, really sorry, and I'm really ashamed, and let's pray over it and fast. Like that's going to do any good. And the Pope acting as if he's somewhat taken aback by this, as if it's come some kind of surprise, as if he didn't know. Despite the fact that this has been the subject of inquiries and inquests and royal commissions since the 1990s. And yet the Pope has the audacity to get up and say, we didn't really know. We really had no way of knowing that this was happening. Bullshit. Not only is it completely unfeasible to suggest that the Pope had no idea that any of this was happening after all of these investigations and inquests since the 1990s, not only is it completely unreasonable to suggest that the Pope shouldn't have launched an investigation into the church and released these documents, these secret archives out into the public where people could look at them just as a sign of goodwill to say, we're doing something. But no, he gets up there and acts all surprised again, like we are deeply, deeply ashamed and the church has changed. The church has not changed. Nothing has changed. The church is the same church it was 50 years ago, as it was 20 years ago, as it was 10 years ago, as it was when Cardinal George Pell was being given sanctuary up until last year when he left voluntarily. This is not the actions of an organisation that gives a flying fuck. I mean, this same thing happens over and over and over again. These inquests comes out, these reports come out, and the Pope acts all surprised and launches an apology and nothing changes. He does nothing. He does absolutely nothing to bring any kind of reparations to the victims that haven't already been exposed. And probably the worst part of all of this is that everybody seems to be getting a little fatigued by the whole ordeal. We've gotten too used to it. A report comes out, the Pope issues an apology, nothing happens. It's just another Sunday. And that's another thing that frustrates me, is that within the skeptical community, there's been people that have read this. Some of the stuff in this report is stuff that we've never heard before. A lot of us had no idea as to the scope of the predatorial nature of the activities of the priest, marking children as victims for other priests to abuse. And yet, these details get lost because people see another headline, the church involved in another sex scandal. Oh God, it's another Sunday. And the more this happens, the more the church gets away with it. Because we're all tired. We've all had enough. But this isn't something that we can just let go. We can't stop now. We can't stop just because this happens all the time. The more this happens, the more we have to stand up and demand that the church release those documents. That every single diocese across the entire world, and we all know they all have records, that those records are released, that the predators are exposed. And I've decided I can't sit by anymore. There's not much I can do. I've never been a Catholic. I can't call the Catholic Church out. I'm not a lawyer. I have no idea where to start with demanding justice. I would like to see the church go to the International Crimes Court for crimes against humanity, but I would have no idea where to start. But I'll tell you where I am going to start. Starting this week, I'm going to start reading the report, not to myself. I'm going to read it as a podcast, as an audiobook that people can listen to in their cars, because people need to hear these stories. And then when I'm done with that report, I'll read another report, and then another report, because we all know that by the time I've finished with this report, with this 1,400-page report, there's going to be more and more, until the church finally wakes up and releases all those documents, or the world wakes up and finally demands that the church releases all those documents. And look, there isn't much more that I can say on this. I mean, apart from the fact I haven't read the report, if you really want a good breakdown of it at this stage, I recommend you go and listen to The Scathing Atheist. Listen to the diatribe at the beginning, because I think it lays out pretty perfectly my thoughts on the matter from a person who has actually read the report already. And I thought about reading the Pope's apology and my response to the apology, but there's no point in reading his apology. It's all the same rhetoric. Nothing has changed. It's hollow words because he hasn't done anything. The church hasn't done anything to change anything. The church hasn't done anything to show that it really cares about the victims of sexual abuse. All they care about is covering their own asses. They'll only admit as much as already been exposed. They never say anything new. So you can read the Pope's apology if you want. All I'm going to say is it's the same apology as it's always been. So instead, I'll just read my response. You do not get to apologize yet, not by a long shot. Neither as yourself nor as a representative of the church. This does not happen now. Your apology should only come when the secret files of every clergy of the world over is opened, when the entire sordid history of the church is laid bare, with the contents of those documents ringing true in the eyes and ears of every man, woman and child, free from summary, free from the assumptions that we have heard all this before. When your clergymen and lawyers cease interference, when they all stop trying to prevent documents from getting into the hands of secular authorities, when they stop trying to prevent those reports from becoming public, when investigations into child sex abuse are performed transparently by secular authorities, not performed in-house, not while priests are being reassigned to developing countries which are free from the self-agency of more self-privileged societies. When you retract your claim that the church is not the same church as it was 50 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, or last year when you were still providing sanctuary to Cardinal George Pell, who left your sanctuary on a voluntary basis, having never been extradited for his crimes. When you provide restitution for your victims and their families, including those who never came forward, one would assume orders of magnitude greater than the victims who did come forward, even if it bankrupts the church. When every priest faced justice for their crimes pursuant to the laws, and those outside of the statute's limitations at least named and exposed for their crimes. When you can accept that given that none of this has happened before you opened your mouth to exude your hollow words, your apology is unlikely to be accepted by your victims, the Christian community, or the secular community at large. Only then can you even consider opening your mouth to ask for forgiveness.